Back in the saddle, looking for a little affection. Welcome to the Bladtcast. Very excited to talk about something we've never covered on the show and a book that I'm thoroughly enjoying. The book is called Bust a Move, Matt Dike, Delicious Vinyl, and the Hip Hop Hits That First Conquered Pop. It is written by Peter Relic, and he is going to be joining us in just a moment. As always, I'm Christian Blatt, and with me in the sidecar is the great John Pette of Out of Wax Records and so many other things that you could be associated with. John, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be a fun one.
And this is Peter Relic, who has written this book that I have in my hands. And we were talking beforehand, and John, you missed all of it because we started talking about Rocket from the Crypt, and you were not here for that conversation. But I want to just kind of start at the beginning, Peter. What was the earliest inkling of an idea of I want to do a book about Delicious Vinyl? And we're pretty close to, I guess, 40 years of the peak of the label. Why now, I guess, is the first question.
We're coming up on it. Delicious Vinyl was founded late in October of 1987. So yeah, just almost 40 years now, just about a year out from that. And here we are 40 years later. And, just last week, I was watching this relatively newish Sydney Sweeney boxing movie. I don't even know if either of you saw Christie, but there's a fight montage where suddenly Sydney Sweeney's slugging it out and Bust a Move comes on. And I just thought, out of the millions of songs that this music supervisor could have used to soundtrack a Sydney Sweeney fight montage, it's a Young MC song, right, from 1989. That was made not in a professional recording studio, but in Matt Dike's dusty second floor apartment over a used refrigerator shop on a block in Hollywood where you would not want to be caught after dark. And so how did this happen? So to answer your question, I started to work on this book almost a decade and a half ago, around 2010. And at that point, I'd spent a decade and a half already working as a music journalist and writing about hip hop. And I noticed, I think it really started with Jeff Chang's book, Can't Stop, Won't Stop, which is a great book about the rise of hip hop culture in the 80s and 90s. And then I started to see more serious book-length treatments of hip hop coming along and music documentaries. And I always just thought, well, certainly someone's going to do something on Delicious Vinyl, right? But it's like, it's like the writer Toni Morrison said, if the book you want to read doesn't exist, it's your responsibility to write it. And so this is that book for me. And it's because I was a kid and, growing up in the 80s, anytime I heard a rap record, I always just gravitated towards it. So groups like the Fat Boys and Houdini, I love this stuff. And when Run DMC came out and the Beastie Boys, and then I remember being in high school and the video for Tone Loc's Wild Thing appearing on MTV. And I just thought, oh, this is great. It reminded me of Run DMC's It's Tricky. There's a crunchy rock riff. It's fun. It's funny. The rapper's good. It's charismatic. He also had on the Delicious Vinyl t-shirt. And I think the logo also it has a certain resonant power. And then I also remember going to school the next day and suddenly all these kids, none of them who had ever expressed any interest in rap music were suddenly like, I love that song. And even then, as a 17-year-old, I realized something had changed. So I think it's stuck in my mind all these years later that something really important had happened at this moment in 88, 89, and that Delicious Vinyl, this label, had been responsible for it. So that's when I decided, hey, maybe there's a book here. And I thought, yeah, it'll take me maybe a couple years to do.
And like you said, a decade and a half. And I guess part of that is that Matt Dike basically disappears in the mid 90s, and that becomes sort of, and we won't give away any of the great stuff. There's plenty of fantastic things that we're going to talk about, but that kind of becomes the central mission of the book, right? Like, I want to actually talk to this guy that no one's heard from in a while, right?
That's right. You know, I approached Delicious Vinyl to write this book. I got in contact with the label co-founder, Mike Ross, and met with him, went to the Delicious Vinyl, still had an office on Sunset Boulevard, and walked in, and Mike said, you know, you seem like an all right guy. Mike's cool. He said, you want to write a book about the label? Sure. And I said, well, where's Matt Dike? You know, where's the guy who co-founded Delicious Vinyl, the guy who really selected all the key, strange, funny samples, who managed to find parts of records that you wouldn't think could be flipped and to make funky hip hop songs that made millions of people dance. And Mike Ross said about Matt Dike, yeah, I haven't seen him in 15 years. So at that
this was like 15 years ago.
This was
right?
15 years ago. And at that point I thought, how could these guys have once been creative partners, really best friends, and had started this small independent record label together, and both still be alive and living in the same city and not have seen each other? And Mike Ross said, well, I don't know anyone who's seen Matt Dike. And so immediately what I thought was going to be a tidy story, a history about a record label, became a mystery about one of its co-founders, and really the creative genius who made all these decisions that took things off the beaten path, that made these songs so special, the one who was the lightning inside the bottle, Matt Dike. And so what I had was a phone number, and I started calling Matt Dike, and that went on for a year, well over a year. And in that year I started to interview other people, meaning people like Mellow Man Ace and Def Jeff and Young MC, the artists who had been on the label, people like Mario Caldato, the engineer who had made all these records with them. I interviewed women who were once go-go girls at nightclubs where Matt Dike DJ'd. And I noticed something that everyone had in common, which is whether they were saying, it seemed like Matt Dike had been responsible for creating the times that these people remembered most fondly and where they had the most fun. And so I realized that it was my responsibility somehow to tell the Matt Dike story. And he had disappeared right at the moment when no one would have disappeared, meaning he disappeared from the scene. He was apparently still living in Los Angeles. He never answered his phone. The phone would ring and ring and ring, and then it would pick up and it would say mailbox full. So I could never leave a message. I wasn't even sure if it was the right number. But it created momentum for me to keep going forward because there was a mystery. And then eventually it just developed into a full-blown obsession for me about this guy who had seemingly walked away when no one would have walked away.
It's the moment in, in the great VH1 series Behind the Music. The moment he goes away is usually where like everyone was riding high, but then tragedy strikes, or then the addiction happens. And there's, well, I guess we do have some of that, but at the same time, it's like, oh yeah, there's no, like, we'll be back after the commercials, because Matt Dike just disappears. I do want to follow some of his footsteps and kind of walk through that a little bit. But John, you had sort of a very interesting sort of middle school into high school era, because talk about where you were and how you discovered.
Give it to me, John. I love to. Sure. I want to hear about this very much.
So first of all, this is such a fascinating story to me because it's so unique in my personal history. Because one, I'm an obsessive music fan and collector. Two, this is the only music I've ever been into that I really know nothing about in the background, right? So Delicious Vinyl was literally the first time I was aware of a record label. These right here are the first two CDs I ever owned.
Yes.
I grew up in Tokyo.
Where did you buy those, John? What store did you get those at?
I will tell you in a second. Okay. I grew up in Tokyo.
Oh wow!
But I left Tokyo after the 6th grade to come back to New York for a time. I ended up going right back to Tokyo a few months later. So I was in the States for the latter half of 1988 and the first part of 1989. Guess what happened during that phase? So the earliest rap that broke through did not connect with me. You know, I knew I had friends in school who were into the Beastie Boys and the Fat Boys and Run DMC. Run DMC was all right to me. But the others did nothing. Like it didn't connect. It was too basic. And then suddenly I get this song that tells a story. You get this that has this voice. You know, Tone Loc had this powerful voice telling these pretty ridiculous stories in these songs, and it just fully connected with me as a middle schooler. I mean, right? So I had the cassette at that stage, and then I moved back to Tokyo in April of 1989, and my parents bought a CD player. And the first CD I bought was Tone Loc in a record store in Japan. And I don't know why I bought it since I already owned the cassette, but I just like, this was important. This is going to be the first one. And then when Young MC hit, it ratcheted it up for me because that really connected with me. Because like as great as Tone Loc was, the Young MC's style and it was effortless. The way that his rhymes came out were just perfect in my ear. And so I heard that song and immediately was like, I need this, but it wasn't out yet. And so I started to track it down, and I found there was a CD store in Akihabara in Tokyo, which was known as like the electronics area, but they got a lot of import CDs in long boxes. That was the one store that in Tokyo that had this in stock, and that's the one that I just showed you.
Fantastic.
So in 1989, when you couldn't just Google what stores have this, you know, you have to actually go and walk around. And I did do some record shopping in Tokyo with John in 1993, and it does require a lot of work. And but you can find the best things. You know, for me, my background is very much more hard rock, metal, classic rock, that stuff. But these are some of the songs that, like you're saying, John, broke through. And it is at a time where I was heavily listening to Top 40, when there was a mix and you could be like, oh, I kind of like this a little bit. I don't know, you know, that Bobby Brown song, whatever, it has like a great beat and, you know, all this. And then Whitesnake comes on and In Excess and, you know, all this stuff. And so it was kind of that last moment where the hodgepodge was a little bit of everything. And like you, I hear Tone Loc and I'm like, oh, I really like this guy. And the video, which I rewatched this morning preparing for this, Peter. And I mean, I don't know if you have a figure on what the budget is, but I think it might be 3 digits for what it costs to make that video.
I think they made Tone Loc's Wild Thing video for $321. And, you know, Tamara Davis, who directed it, and of course, Tamara went on, she's still very active making big Hollywood movies. And, you know, she made CB4 and Happy Gilmore. And I mean,
don't forget Half Baked, by the way.
Don't forget Half Baked. How could we ever forget Half Baked? What they did to that poor horse. But, you know, when they made the Wild Thing video, it's obviously a parody. Any kid who grew up with MTV had seen this Robert Palmer video, Addicted to Love, that it's based on. And, you know, that thing had been in microwave rotation where it felt like it was constantly on MTV, like you just didn't want to see it again. And also, it's this very sort of dry, desiccated Robert Palmer with these icy models. So the fact that they flipped this, and then you've got this big black dude wearing a leather jacket and a Delicious Vinyl t-shirt, it's really smart what they did, right? And MTV had enough of a sense of humor about itself to realize that, hey, man, this rap music thing is coming on strong and they're doing something really creative, and we should have enough of a sense of humor about ourselves to show this video. And of course, as soon as MTV showed Tone Loc Wild Thing video and Robert Palmer said, oh, this makes me laugh, they were off to the races.
Well, yeah, and the song is so funny, and the style. I mean, it's this close to how it could have just been something that was played on the Dr. Demento show. And
it's right. Dr. Demento is a great precedent, you know. Anybody who grew up, you know, hearing a song like Barnes and Barnes' Wet Dream was primed for hearing.
Well, Kip Addotta was Wet Dream. Barnes and Barnes was Fish Heads.
Oh, Fish Heads.
Yeah,
Fish Heads.
Yeah. Kip Addotta did all the puns. He did the fish head. Sorry, he did.
Thank you.
He did that.
Very
and
much.
Follow up, of course, was Life in the Slaw Lane. So it was vegetable puns.
Right.
But the Barnes and Barnes with Billy Mooney and the
halibut.
Fish Heads video.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, I wasn't planning on hitting the bell during this episode, but yes. for the halibut.
I wanted to bring something back, John. You mentioned storytelling as one of the things that really attracted you to these records. And these are incredibly well-told, funny stories. And I mean, Wild Thing, Funky Cole Medina, and Bust a Move. And these stories develop over 4 narrative verses. And that's what makes them classic pop songs too, right? You know, at one point, one of the creators of Funky Cole Medina said, yeah, we based the idea off Love Potion number 9. And you're like, yeah, exactly. That's what makes this a classic pop song. You have a guy, bit of a nerd, so he's an underdog, so you're rooting for him to have success at the thing he doesn't have success in, which is what Bust a Move is too, right?
Yep.
You know, anyway, so I think that part, John, that you bring up, which is the storytelling in these songs, also really help them capture the popular imagination.
One of the many things that I learned was the way that that Wild Thing broke on the radio here in Los Angeles specifically was not what I would have expected. Funny, I used to run into Jed the Fish when I worked at Westwood One, and he, of course, for people that don't know, he was on K-Rock, KROQ at that point. And, you know, so that is very much rock alternative, you know, the college radio format at the time. So he's not the guy that you would think would break this record in Los Angeles.
Not at all,
Peter.
Not at all. So I interviewed Jed the Fish, who unfortunately passed away.
Yeah, I saw that.
And Jed was great. The first thing he said when he got on the phone with me was, "I'm so glad you called to talk about this. It's one of my favorite songs. It's one of my favorite memories as a radio DJ is breaking this particular record, which is Wild Thing by Tone Loc." And he said, "But you should know, I hate hip hop. I hated hip hop then, and I hate hip hop now. So we're not going to, if you think you're calling because we're going to bond over being lovers of hip hop culture, that's not what this is." But yeah, at this time, KROQ, K-Rock in Los Angeles was really alternative music, alternative rock music, new wave music.
But also the hit maker in the country.
Also the hit maker, the taste-making hit maker, right? And Jed the Fish heard, John, what you heard, which is Tone Loc's voice, and thought, I respond to this voice. And then he heard the humor and this weird kind of mixture that Tone Loc has, which is he's lovable. Is there something dangerous here too? Oh, it's funny. He has gravitas. So Jed the Fish picked Tone Loc's Wild Thing as his catch of the day and played it on K-Rock, which was not a radio station that played hip hop songs, but it meant that everybody responded. And Jed the Fish said the phones lit up. Also, we listened to the sample, this very clever inversion of Janie's Cryin' by Van Halen, which I also go into in the book. To the point where Alex Van Halen didn't recognize his big drum fill when he heard Wild Thing at first, because Matt Dike knew how to take something from our musical sense memory banks that we all share because we grew up in the same era on the same radio hits, and invert it and replace the pieces in a way so there's some sort of bell ringing in the back of our head. There's some sort of neurons that are firing, but you don't quite know where it's from. That's part of Matt Dike's masterful talent of making these hip hop tracks.
John, I feel like you were going to jump in with something a moment ago.
Please, John.
I have so many questions I'd like to ask you. I followed a path with hip hop that was kind of finite, right? Like I got into this stuff, and then as I got slightly more mature, Public Enemy hit me, and then that was it, right?
That's it.
But I did not make the jump when NWA was hitting, when Snoop came out. It didn't connect with me at all.
You were living back in Japan at that time? Or
I was. I was in Japan for all of that. But when that transition happened, I didn't follow it, and I lost the handle and didn't really get it back. Occasionally something will catch me. But from what I see, we now have several decades of really well-documented hip hop culture in different scenes. I feel like this period does not quite get the credit that it deserves for breaking through, because it is radio friendly. It's pop. It's clean in a lot of cases. Well, that's Young MC is, at least, and it's. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that and how you see it in the greater story of hip hop?
Absolutely, John. It's a great question also because you're asking based on your own experience, which is these were the songs that gave you reason to seek them out as on a cassette and then CD. And I think probably from that era, for a lot of people, this was the first hip hop record that they might have bought. And therefore, these records were so huge. These hits were so big that it almost created like a blast radius that had a flattening effect around it. So you would assume that these songs, appeared through some sort of parthenogenic, cosmic, immaculate conception. And there couldn't be that much of a story about them because they've always been there and they emerged perfect and fully formed. And what I found is the opposite was true. And by the opposite, I mean, there was a lot of story and a lot of background. And the more I dug into the things that had happened in the years leading up to it, the more I realized, for example, in the dawn of the compact disc era, everyone was offloading their old vinyl records for cheap, just getting rid of them, dumping them, because now CDs are the thing. But Matt Dike is still buying records. So he's going to the 29-cent bin at Aaron's Records and buying things like the Detective album on Swan Song, or buying like old Foreigner records out of like a 29-cent bin and finding the guitar riff that he can use to place inside a beat that he's making on his MPC drum machine to make the beat that rings that bell. And that's it. He just unlocked this magical thing. And it was definitely a product of a time and a place. It had to happen in LA. It had to happen at the tail end of the 80s. It had to happen to a maniacal record collector, all of these things. And yeah, I can't tell you how many times in researching this story, I was floored by both how faded it seemed and how totally unlikely and bizarre the series of circumstances had to align for any of it to happen.
There's a lot of happenstance, meeting John Michael Basquiat and then reconnecting with him, and Madonna's his girlfriend at the moment.
Right.
Just for a very personal moment, I have to talk about, John's talking about how little we knew about these guys and Delicious Vinyl. So I'm reading your book and I have to text him when I see it because you wouldn't know this about me, Peter, but I went to George F. Baker High School in Tuxedo, New York. And so did Matt Dike long before me. But
I would have had I not moved to Japan.
That's true. If he didn't move to Japan, he would have gone there. But I will say that, his sister gets kicked out for smoking pot, and that's reference. That's not what was happening in the early 90s when I was there. It was a little bit of a different scene. But just reading, because I'm reading like, in Suffern, and I'm like, Suffern's one of these interesting places because recently was part of an interview with Claudio from Coed and Cambria. Randomly, he's from Suffern. And I'm reading like, and he worked in Tuxedo Park. And then there's the line about George F. Baker High School. I'm like, hey, I went there. So it's such a crazy turn of events to just read that, but it also makes sense. It's this spot that could be 1,000 miles away from New York City, but technically it's really only 45 minutes. And so the fact that he starts, DJing and he gets all those opportunities, because he's right there, it didn't feel that close to the city. I will tell you that much, Peter, but, and he really is pretty quickly able to kind of make a name for himself just because he likes to play records. Right, Peter?
Yeah, and I think that predates this whole thing that is now sort of a ubiquitous cultural role, which is the DJ. In fact, we're all DJs now, right? I mean, the way we consume music is through recombinant simultaneity of our own choosing through streaming. And Matt Dike was the DJ when, sure, the role of a DJ existed. Your radio DJs, you had nightclub DJs, but you didn't have the superstar DJ where that person was necessarily the center of attention in the place where the music was happening. The center of attention was the dance floor. And now we live in an era where people go to see DJs and stuff like that. But time out. You went to the same high school as Matt Dike?
And no one talked about it.
Nobody knew.
My brother is a few years older than me, so he was there when Delicious Vinyl, broke and these songs happened. No one was talking about it.
Of course.
Yeah, no one talked about the fact that this guy went here. So, it's not something that I expect to come across when I'm reading about the founding of a record label.
Fantastic. So, this fact and in the book, there's quite a bit about Tuxedo Park and his childhood, because I really felt that Tuxedo Park is this very peculiar
Very
and
weird.
historic American place, it's really the first gated community in the United States. So it's built in 1890 by Pierre Lorillard. This is some wealthy tobacco heir, and it's where the 300 wealthiest families in America decide they're going to live, all in one place. And then, over the decades after the Wall Street crash, the end of 1920s, Tuxedo Park starts to fall off because these huge houses, the upkeep on them is astronomical. But by the 50s and 60s, Matt Dike's father, who's a master carpenter, moves his family into that area because he can work on these homes and he knows how to do crown molding and parquet floors. And so Matt is raised in a working class family, but in an opulent, incredibly a town that was once incredibly wealthy and therefore will always sort of be that thing. So Matt is both outsider, working class kid, but he sees the way the wealthiest tiny percentage of Americans once lived in this place called Tuxedo Park. He's also raised a Jehovah's Witness. So he's in this very constricted, repressive thing where everything is done for religion, and we're entering into the end times. So repent, and you can't do enough for your religion. Whereas Matt's a horny 13-year-old hearing Led Zeppelin and Mountain and thinking about, well, what is this lemon going down his leg? What could that possibly be? And that also comes through in a song like Wild Thing, right? It's very much a song for, an adolescent boy who is feeling his oats for the first time in a world that tells him he needs to sit down and behave in church, right? And anyway, I just find the Tuxedo Park thing fascinating, which is why I go into it quite a bit in the book, so that you understand the psyche of this kid Matt Dike, and why, for example, things like comic books and records meant so much to him, because you weren't supposed to have them because it's the devil's work, right?
Yeah. They meant a lot to me just because I liked them, but I was reading about that. And and even in the early 90s, a friend of mine, his father was like a police officer there. So they didn't have Tuxedo Park money, but they lived there and went to the public school down the hill. So you'd go up there and you go, oh my God, look at this place. I'd never seen anything like that. But where I lived in Greenwood Lake, you wouldn't expect that. But so it's fascinating that's sort of the background, but getting to, get the point where he's, in the city and, he's rubbing elbows and shoulders and everything with people that aren't necessarily big and important in the moment. But, Jean Michael Basquiat is the one that just comes up and you're like, well, he's just a guy that he knew and he thought his name was, you just knew him as John, right?
John, right?
Yeah.
He calls Jean-Michel, he just calls him John. Yeah. And a slightly older friend of Matt's from Tuxedo Park, his friend Phil, winds up going to NYU. And Matt goes in to visit him, and they're having a party in the Weinstein dormitory. And there's a teenage graffiti artist who shows up, and Matt is playing records, and one of the records he plays is "Got the Time" by Joe Jackson. And this teenage graffiti artist, who was then just this guy that Matt thought his name was John, because he didn't meet him as the Jean-Michel Basquiat that we now know as a world-conquering, great legacy, important artist of the 20th century, comes up to him and grabs Matt Dike and says, got the time. And I just thought, how cool that these guys, when they're 15 years old, bonded over a Joe Jackson song. And then, as it turns out, Basquiat and Dike don't, then they go their separate ways in life, and then they happen to run into each other again in LA. And at a point when Jean-Michel is a huge, hot art star and is, being shown in all the blue chip galleries. Everyone wants to be around this dreadlock painter. He's on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. His paintings are already worth millions of dollars, and he's only 25, 26 years old at this point. And Matt Dike is about to start his new record label. And so Jean-Michel is a really famous young painter, starts whenever he's in LA, comes to hang out with Matt, and they reconnect and resume their friendship. And it's a beautiful thing. And then it's also a very terrible and tragic thing, which is that Basquiat dies of a drug overdose right as Matt Dike's record label is taking off. So this beautiful reconnection that these two guys have is over too soon.
Yeah, and the book details sort of the scene that builds how rooms start getting bigger and bigger, that they're just playing, and you said it yourself a moment ago, just the idea of like there would be this focus on the DJ because of the random things.
That's right.
And I think the emergence of hip hop culture, you as you look back, it gets pointed out like, oh yeah, there's I think Billy Squire for some reason is somebody that is in a lot of riffs, like Jay-Z's used them, So
Yeah,
like,
got the
yeah,
big beat thing, right?
yeah, right, exactly. So, and it's not the way that you think about it, but when you're somebody like Matt Dike and you have they're talking about the thousands of records he has, it's like, oh yeah, I've heard something that I think would go really good in here. And you touched on it a little bit, the emergence of any kind of home computer with a little bit of memory, so they're able to start creating these loops. And I think that comes up because when they did an appearance on a small radio show, which I forget where that was.
Yeah,
but
KSPC, the Big Beat Showcase out in the Claremont colleges, which is about 40 miles east of LA.
Yeah, it's about 40 miles or 2.5 hours. Just depends on when you go. Yeah, I know exactly where that is.
Yeah.
And just hearing that show had this beat, and it was like, oh my God, how did you even do that?
How'd you do this?
Yeah. So I think that's probably what it turns into, is just like-minded people like, oh my God, I love this sound that you have. It's a it's a play on Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future. Do you know the new sound you're looking for?
Yeah,
that's
right. That's right.
Yeah. And so talk a little bit about sort of just this conglomeration of all these people who just seem to happen to meet each other at the same time. And LA's, hip hop scene or any kind of rap scene wasn't big. Ice-T is somebody that you're able to isolate, but it was nothing like what was going on in New York, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ice-T is really sort of like the first guy that really gets out of the gates and signs to Sire Records, and is sort of the first rapper from LA that people start to notice. But at this time, in the mid 80s, certainly even still by 1987, by 1988, if it's real hip hop, it's got to come from New York City, because New York City is the birthplace of hip hop culture, and those two things are synonymous. So if you're not from New York, how real could it even be? And so Delicious Vinyl is really important in that it's the label that is making credible, creative hip hop, that anyone who loves rap records immediately hears how fresh it is, how well made it is, how truly lyrical, well crafted it is. I mean, it's not like these later sort of rap pop hits that were just like, made to cross over. They were making records that the girls they liked would dance to them, and that rappers could show their lyrical prowess on them. But yeah, it was a big moment, because really when they founded Delicious Vinyl, they were just pressing up records at a local record plant that they would hand deliver to record stores. And, Matt Dike was like, well, if we sell 5,000 records, that would be amazing. But what happens is Chris Blackwell from Island Records hears these Tone Loc songs that they're working on and says, I'm going to give you guys a worldwide distribution deal. And John, when you mentioned getting these CDs, that was the key at the time, was you had to get this product manufactured and into a store so that kids could buy it. There was no other way to do it.
That's right. And you're hitting so many key ideas for me that I want to dig into. But
yeah, please.
The fact that Chris Blackwell, the founder of Island Records, so talk about somebody who spent 2/3 of his life being in the right place at the right time, right there. One of my interests is early Jamaican ska records, and so I have a big pile over there.
So it starts with My Boy Lollipop with Chris Blackwell.
Sure,
right?
Yeah, but he, you said earlier that this could only have happened at this specific place at this specific time, and I truly believe that to be true. But from the standpoint of the larger music industry, it was a particularly unique moment in my mind. And I think in reading this story, which I did not know beforehand, I just kept thinking of one thing, and that was a couple years later when the grunge era exploded.
Yeah.
Which I don't know of another example since the beginning of rock and roll, really, when like something took off that was really homegrown, really DIY, and it forced the industry to respond to it. You know, it
That's
wasn't
right.
the industry picking it and deciding it was time, which is the general way that it went. But that's what happened here, right? These they were making it in his apartment, and it was,
That's
and
right.
then they took it to, they pressed it at Rainbow Records, and then
That's right. You know, what's fascinating is, in fact, the record industry was set up to keep this sound away from
right.
everybody. You know, the Billboard charts were engineered so that things like rap music wouldn't get on them, because radio play was factored into the Billboard charts, and top 40 radio wouldn't play hip hop records. So these records could never go into the popular charts, which was another way of keeping street level black music, and hip hop is black music no matter who's making it, out of the popular consciousness. But of course, then this tipping point happens. Not unlike Chris Blackwell hearing the Wailing Wailers and saying, well, if we put a little rock guitar on the top of this Bob Marley joint, I think the world will buy this. So the Chris Blackwell thing is really important too, that you have this seasoned record industry veteran. Island also is plugged into the huge international WIA distribution network, and he's always just a little bit ahead of the current. You know, Chris Blackwell puts out these Malcolm McLaren double Dutch records earlier in the 80s. So he's already hearing this way, this scratch, cut, and mix hip hop culture. Something's happening here. But Chris Blackwell hears Tone Loc's Wild Thing and says, well, now I'm going all in with these guys.
And he had the extra capital too, because U2 had just exploded, right?
That's right.
So that's right.
Really, U2 had just exploded.
Yeah.
So that gave Chris Blackwell huge clout to push something else to the fore. And that something else happened to be hip hop with these delicious final hits. An incredible confluence of circumstances.
Yeah, and I think as it relates to hip hop, again, any kind of rap, obviously MTV has such a huge part of that, because radio stations wouldn't play it. But I sure saw Run DMC, and I saw the Fat Boys, and all that was on. You got to talk to Fab Five Freddy for the book, and he was the first, like, I don't know, I guess VJ is what they, he was like he was the rap guy. Before they had Ed Lover and the other Dr.
That's
Dre.
right. Fab Five Freddy was the original host of Yo MTV Raps.
Yeah.
And, Fab Five Freddy, it just so happens that Fab Five Freddy published his own memoir this year called Everybody's Fly. And it's an incredible book. Freddy is really the figure who helped translate hip hop culture for a generation of young people who had no other way to access this music because we weren't from the inner city. Mm-hmm. So Fab Five Freddy first was, a painter. He's also an actor in the movie Wild Style. And then Freddy appears in the Spike Lee movie, She's Gotta Have It. And there's a scene where a bunch of men are saying the lines that they use to try to pick up chicks, right? And Fab Five Freddy's line is, yo, baby, let's go back to my place and do the wild thing.
Yeah.
And Matt Dike sees this movie and thinks, oh my God, that's so funny. And that sticks in Matt Dike's head. So when they start Delicious Final, he says to Tone Loc, let's do a song called Wild Thing. Like Fab Five Freddy in that movie. Come on, baby, let's do the Wild Thing. So Fab Five Freddy is also the catalyst for Delicious Final's first big hit. And yeah, I talked to Fab Five. I spoke to Fab Five Freddy. I interviewed Fab Five Freddy. And yeah, for anyone who remembers when Yo MTV Raps first appeared on MTV, which had been a very white network,
sure,
up to that point.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly there was something vibrant. And, the moment that KRS-One steps out of the Jeep at the beginning of Boogie Down Productions' My Philosophy video, you realize that something had changed. The same way when you saw the Wild Thing video from Tone Loc, you realized something has changed. And there's no going back to thinking Foreigner is where it's at.
No, but Foreigner has their place, but I know
exactly. Foreigner does have their place, and one of the places Foreigner has is the riff from Hot Blooded being in Funky Cole Medina, which is again something Matt Dike just had a way to just turn the culture, just give it a big turn so where it was, and now it's here, but it's connected.
So, we talk about sort of the two big artists, the two big songs. We're talking about Wild Thing. We're talking about Bust a Move. And, Young MC basically gets brought in to make it a little bit more radio friendly, Wild Thing. And, you read about it, and these couldn't be two guys that are less alike, I think, and but the collaboration for that song on that one moment in time before he goes off and does his own thing, it's perfect. It's what gets it on the radio,
That's right. And that's why it works, Christian, is because Tone Loc is a weed-smoking tough guy from West LA, and Young MC is a nerdy economics major at the University of Southern California.
So I love so much.
Yeah.
And so when you get that, two guys with diametrically different day-to-day behavioral predilections, and it works, and it makes it so funny and great. And so for the duration of those two songs, Young MC contributed significantly to writing the lyrics to those songs. And you know what? For the rest of the Tone Loc album, Loc After Dark, Tone wrote all the rest of his own lyrics. It was,
and
just
that's clear,
right?
Yeah.
And it's clear. It's clear. Yeah. And it was a partnership. And also, again, none of them expected this to be huge. And of course, this type of success proved to be Matt Dike's undoing, and none of the other guys were ever able to repeat this moment when they had lightning in the bottle.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the thing that there's not really follow-up success. Yes, Young MC also has Principal's Office. Yes, there's Funky Cole Medina. In the book, you talk about Tone Loc starting out the Club MTV tour, where he's sort of the last build. But then they end up selling out the Forum because of the strength of his. And, I forget who else was Not Was with Walk the Dinosaur.
That's right. And Paula Abdul was on this tour. She had Opposites Attract. And Milli Vanilli was also on this tour for a bit. Tone Loc was bottom of the bill. But one of the great things about Tone Loc is, and you see it in the Wild Thing videos, his charisma is insane. Yeah. And they all said, we just thought Tone Loc was like this stoned, sort of stoic, tough guy. But it turns out Tone knows how to dance, and he's got charisma. So they come to LA, and they're playing the sold-out Forum. And suddenly Matt Dike and Mike Ross realize, HFS, this song we made in your apartment, there are 18,000 teeny boppers on their feet losing their minds to it. How did this happen? And that's how the book really starts. I wanted to start at this peak moment, and then we rewind all the way back to show how all these things happen to lead us back up to that moment.
You talk about something in the book, which is, sort of the, if you're really into this level of music, it's fascinating because you talk about getting the clearances. And obviously the Wild West of hip hop and rap was you didn't have to worry so much. I've heard it quoted that if the Beastie Boys had made Paul's Boutique like 15, 20 years later, it would have cost between $20 to $50 million, but they also would not have been able to have any Zeppelin samples because they wouldn't have let you have
Beatles. There's Beatles samples.
There's not enough money where they would say, sure, pay us, Right. So the story that I think is very funny is the clearance for Janie's Crying. And I think it's sort of whispered to you the amount. It's a moment that John and I wouldn't be particularly happy to have been at Dodger Stadium to watch our New York Mets being defeated by the Los Angeles Dodgers.
I mean, this was the year that was the year the Mets were going to do it, right? Like that's what they say. The only time the Dodgers beat the Mets was when it mattered the most, and I cannot imagine for you guys how devastating that was.
Was my first dose of sports trauma. Yeah, truly, because that was also the fall where I was back in the States. I wasn't there for '86.
Oh wow!
I came back and I watched all of that in the 7th grade, which is when it means the most.
So we're talking about 1988 now.
Yeah, 1988. Yeah, so it's when this is happening, and talk about how a chance encounter at the National League Championship Series at Dodger Stadium leads to everything being buttoned down, and Janie's Crying isn't going to be a problem.
Thanks for bringing up this story because it was a really fun story to tease out and tell. And Christian, I'm sure your listeners are like, why are they suddenly talking about baseball? Did I miss something here in this conversation?
They know my show well enough that they're not.
No, that
the Mets come up a lot.
The tangent is actually the thing that runs through the center on the Bladtcast. I'd been talking to Mike Ross one day, And I'm from Cleveland. I grew up in a sports family. I know what suffering means.
Sure.
And, we've been talking about baseball, and I brought up the 1988 Dodgers and this famous a home run that a hobbled Kirk Gibson hit to win the World Series, right? And Mike had said, well, what's funny about that team is, and then Mike Ross told me this story, which is, it's not the World Series. It was the National League Championship Series of the New York Mets against the Los Angeles Dodgers. And Mike Ross went to the game with Eddie Loeffler, who was Van Halen's manager, and who's the Eagles manager? What's his name? I'm forgetting.
Is that Irving Azoff? Or
that's Irving Azoff, right? How could we forget? So Mike had been an intern at MCA Records, and Irving Azoff was the manager of the Eagles, of course. So Mike gets invited by Irving Azoff, the manager of the Eagles, to go to the Dodgers game. And Mike's like, Mike's probably like 26, 27. He's like, oh, ticket to the NLCS? Yeah, sure, Irving, I'll be right there. And Mike didn't know that Van Halen's manager, Eddie Loeffler, was going too. But they're sitting at Dodger Stadium, they're drinking beers, and Irving Azoff, being a business-minded guy, is pumping Mike Ross for information about his cool independent hip-hop label. And Mike's like, well, yeah, we got this new song, Wild Thing. Funny enough, Eddie, it's actually based on a Van Halen sample. And Eddie Loeffler's like, it's like people from that older generation or era assume that hip-hop was just were like novelty records, right? You weren't going to sell that many copies of a novelty record, right? It might be a little hit, but there was no idea that you were going to sell 1 million records or 3 million records. So Van Halen's manager, over the course of this game, when the Dodgers beat the Mets to send them to the Dodgers to the World Series, said, sure, no problem. We'll sign off on you sampling Van Halen. I'll sign off on you sampling Van Halen for your little novelty rap record that you've made with your little independent label. And that wound up being Eddie Van Halen's guitar riff from the Van Halen song Janie's Crying that sounds like Wild Thing. And then Alex Van Halen's so it's the bulk of Wild Thing are these parts that Matt Dike took from Van Halen Janie's Crying, and that the Van Halen manager Eddie Loeffler said, oh, sure, $2,000? Huh, that's pocket money, no problem. So Van Halen got no royalties off Wild Thing.
Which is just crazy to think about.
It's millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Any happy manager. And then, of course, that changes everything, because at that point, no one's going to sign off on a sample clearance without getting songwriting credit for their artist who sampled. And, of course, then we have numerous examples.
Yeah, you have all of a sudden Billboard having to have an enormous rectangle when you list Vanilla Ice, Ice Ice Baby, because it's also written by David Bowie and all the members of Queen. So all of a sudden it's and that's when you start to get those things. And the clearances and not getting them is fascinating. I mean, I've heard something about the amount of money that Puff Daddy had to pay Sting for not actually clearing Every Breath You Take.
That's right. And this happened, like Lord Tariq and Peter Gunn sampling Steely Dan. And then Steely Dan says, oh, we're going to take 100% of your publishing because you didn't clear it in advance. But it all goes back to this magical moment, actually not magical for Mets fans, but for Mike Ross as a lifelong kid growing up in LA, to be there when Oral Hershiser pitched the Dodgers to the World Series, and he gets to meet Van Halen's manager, who tells him, sure, kid, no problem. You can sample our record for your funny little rap novelty record that's coming out. So that's another example of how this could have only happened in LA. This could have only happened in this moment when hip hop culture is right on the cusp of suddenly being a popular culture, a truly popular culture that is worth millions of dollars, with hit songs gate crashing the Billboard charts because it can't be held back anymore.
Yeah, and the book we've been talking about, Bust a Move, Matt Dike, Delicious Vinyl, and the hip hop hits that first conquered pop. We've been talking to Peter Relic about it. Before we wind everything down, though, the book does point out that it's just this really quick meteoric rise, but boy, it just kind of loops right back down almost as quickly.
Right.
Is there something, as you're spending, 15 years on this book, is there a couple of key moments where if they'd done this or that, there might have been sustained success?
Yeah, I thought about this as someone who loves to sort of do what if, think, oh, if they had done this, if they had tried this. But the truth is that hip hop culture and popular music were developing really quickly at the time. And, we live in a time now where there's always innovation and people doing interesting things. But I feel like a lot of music now, we know that these sounds that we're hearing, but at the time, a lot of this stuff was fresh and hip hop was changing really rapidly. Suddenly you had the rise of gangster rap in Los Angeles, and Dr. Dre came out, NWA got big, and then Snoop Dogg came out, and suddenly gangster rap and LA were synonymous. And it suddenly obscured that anything else had ever happened in LA, including this really cool, tiny little independent label called Delicious Vinyl. They had started out of this guy's apartment. So even though the songs endured, it somehow obscured the fact that this had happened in Los Angeles as an independent record label story. So that's really what I wanted to tell, is that story. But of course, it didn't last. And the reason it didn't last is because I think these people were really young, too. So Young MC, and John, I know you know this from owning that CD, which I'm sure you listened to, that you're really familiar with the entire album. A lot of these are songs that Young MC wrote when he was as young as 12 years old. Young MC is really the original young rapper.
Yeah.
And then suddenly Young MC is a college student. Young MC is a really erudite, savvy, intelligent person, and there was no way he could keep doing fun stuff. He wanted to say serious things about, the importance of staying in school and the importance of keeping it in your pants and things like that. And that's not what people really had ever gone to Young MC for. And then everyone was sort of surprised and undone by their own success. You know how sometimes when someone wins the lottery, they say they're so happy, and then they say, actually, it wound up being the worst thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
There's this quote in the book where Young MC said to me, it was like, imagine playing the lottery and you win the first 3 times that you played. That's what happened to us with Wild Thing, Funky Cole Medina, and Bust a Move. And they never really recovered from that. And one of the great things is that, and I know I'm sort of plugging this now, but I'm going to be at the Grammy Museum here in downtown Los Angeles tomorrow with Young MC, who won the Grammy in 1990 for Best Rap Recording for Bust a Move. And the other songs that were nominated that year include Fight the Power by Public Enemy, and Me, Myself, and I by De La Soul. So when you think about what a rich variety of incredible hip hop was being made right at this cusp as the 80s ends and then the 90s begins. And for those groups, it didn't all carry forward for them. And I'm really, his name's Marvin Young MC. I'm really looking forward to being on stage with him tomorrow. And again, I know I'm sort of jumping forward a bit, but the other thing I want to say about the book is that Be Real from Cypress Hill wrote the foreword. And it's mind-blowing, the things that Be Real kind of revealed to me about the story that I didn't even know. And Be Real is going to be there at the Grammy Museum too tomorrow. So if you're in LA, please come
wish.
out.
Well, I as I told Peter, I will be there tomorrow.
Great, looking forward to it.
And John, I even have a +1. You could come, except for the fact that
fact that I'm clear across the country.
Yes.
No, I would love that. And Young MC is such a it was so influential to me in that era. I love hearing how much of a dork he actually was.
Yes.
I
right.
love and
it's a virtue. It proved to be a virtue,
absolutely.
Right?
It does make me really wonder what they could have done together, what he could have done had he not broken with the label, and what his next album really would have sounded like, because it didn't
question mark, right?
So.
I wonder too if I also feel like maybe that was an era when people communicate, artists, guys talking to each other about their real intentions and desires in life probably was not really as effective as we've learned to communicate effectively now. John, this has been really amazing to hear you talk about your personal experience, and Christian too. I think for me, this is the truly enjoyable part of having this book come out, is realize, oh, there's people for whom these records were really important, that remember it from a special time in their life, and those people have stories too. So it's super enjoyable for me.
Oh yeah, and as I was saying in the beginning, rap and hip hop is not really where I spend a lot of time listening. I did enjoy the Beastie Boys, and you want to talk about the first time you hear Janie's crying after hearing Wild Thing so many times. There's so many on just License to Ill alone. There's so many like Zeppelin riffs that you hear Zeppelin. You think, oh, I know that. So yeah, it's crazy to put it all together. And so it's these two and Digital Underground to an extent.
Matt Dike and Mike Ross love Digital Underground. To them, that's the best thing. They love Digital Underground. So that's very much working in the same spirit for sure.
And that was the other one for me as well. Like that with add Public Enemy, that's my Mount Rushmore.
There you go.
Hip-hop, so.
Hey,
and these songs really endure all the ones we're talking about to the extent that I'm not much of a singer, but I will pick the right moment to do karaoke, as I did once in Nashville in Painter's Alley. And no one expected me to bring out Bust a Move. And there's a video that my friend filmed in the back. There's a sea of cowboy hats, but everybody just loves hearing this song because everybody knew it. I'm not a hip hop guy, and no one in that room is, but everybody's like, I don't just like that song. I love that song. And that's why this story is so fascinating. Like John said, a lot of times, I read music industry books, any kind of bios or something. I feel like I know a fair amount. I knew almost none of this.
I didn't know Matt Dike or Mike Ross were white guys. Like, it just never occurred to me. Like, obviously that especially Mike Ross, that's not a black guy name, right? Like that's just,
right. But there's a great part where Def Jeff is about to sign with Ice-T's Rhyme Syndicate label, and then he hears the Delicious Final Thing, and then he goes there and he goes, "Wait, you guys are white?" But the truth is, the beat's dope. So this is where I'm gonna be.
Well, I do hope everybody checks out the book Bust a Move, Matt Dike, Delicious Final, and the hip hop hits that first conquered pop. Anything else you want people to know, where they can find you on social media, anything like that, Peter?
I'm on Instagram. It's at Relic on Record. And if anybody out there wants to talk and share personal memories, it's a really enjoyable part of this process for me. And just to mention one thing that we didn't talk about much, Def Jeff, which is, go listen to this Def Jeff song, Droppin' Rhymes on Drums, that he made with Etta James. I think it represents a peak in up-tempo, high-energy hip-hop creativity, and the fact that a Delicious Vinyl artist made a song with the legend, the R&B legend that is Etta James. It's like a lesser-known Delicious Vinyl song that coulda, shoulda been a bigger hit, but I think the Def Jeff song, Droppin' Rhymes on Drums, would be the focus track I think that everybody should add to their playlist.
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to do that right after we're done. Right. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I started off by saying Back in the Saddle, and our next episode is going to be the 50th anniversary of Aerosmith Rocks. We've got an all-star panel over there, including my friend Brian Slagle, the CEO of Metal Blade Records. So please tune in for that. Like, subscribe, whether you're watching on YouTube or just listening. And as Peter said, if you're in LA, find your way to the Grammy Museum. Thanks again, and thanks to John Pette. We will see you next time on the Bladtcast.
John.